The 1953 NBA All-Star Game might count as the worst one ever. Took place at the Allen County War Memorial Coliseum on Tuesday, January 13, 1963. This year around, the West was wearing white, which is strange because up until this point they had always worn blue, so they just swapped colors for no reason. This year, the contenders in the East were the Syracuse Nationals, the Boston Celtics, and the New York Knicks. The contenders in the West were the Lakers and the Royals. There were only 2 new All-Stars in the West. The number 1 All-Star in the West was George Mikan. In the 6 years of the NBA, he had already won 3 championships, and this season he'd go on to win his 4th. He's leading the league in rebounds as well, and he's a consistent force on the All-NBA first team. This is kind of the best player in the world at the time. Traded in 1953 to the Pistons, Andy Phillip became the first ever interconference All-Star transfer. He'd previously been an East starter. This is the first time he'd become a West starter. Also starting in the West was the 2nd overall pick from the year before. Mel Hutchins had been the first ever rookie to lead the league in total rebounds, when the season before he tied with George Mikan at 880 rebounds for the season. The only other time this happened was with Wilt Chamberlain. The only 2 times that's happened in NBA history. The first ever convoluted family relation in NBA history is this one. Mel Hutchins had a sister who won Miss America in 1952. Mel Hutchins' sister's brother-in-law was the father of 2-time former All-Star Kiki Vandeweghe, who was an All-Star in the 90s. Bobby Wanzer from the Royals. The Royals are still contenders in the West, so one of the best backcourt members in the NBA is still here. Vern Mikkelsen, part of the Big 3 in the Lakers. The Lakers are still good, so he's still here. Slater Martin, another Laker, is an All-Star. This time instead of Jim Pollard, Slater Martin, who was one of their key defenders, became an All-Star. Arnie Rison, also from the Rochester Royals, is starting in the All-Star game. Larry Faust suffers from injuries and was unable to participate in the All-Star game last year. He's the first ever, along with Dolph Schayes in the East, example of a player missing a year and coming back the next year with injury. Bob Davies is also on the Rochester Royals, part of the best backcourt in the NBA. Leo Barnhurst had upped his scoring average from the season before from 12 points per game up to almost 14 because he'd upped his field goal attempts from 13.6 to 14.6. He still managed to average 39% field goal percentage, which is wild. This was his last All-Star selection, but on this day he got to be remembered and honored as an All-Star. There were 6 All-Stars selected to the East out of 10. The first All-Star in the East was Bob Cousy for the Celtics. In 1953, Bob Cousy made further progress and became even better. He averaged a league-leading 7.7 assists per game, and this is before the shot clock, so he must have just been going at it with the fast breaks. This is the same season that Bob Cousy scored 25 points in the 4 regulation quarters and then scored 25 points in the 4 overtimes in a game versus the Syracuse Nationals in the playoffs. They still didn't manage to win that playoff game, but Bob Cousy managed to set the record for the most free throw attempts in an NBA playoff game with 32 attempts, and he made 30 of them. Ed Macauley had his best assist and rebound year in 1953. Along with his good efficiency, this is probably his best season and his prime. At 24 years old, he's one of the best players in the NBA, and of course he's on the Celtics. In 1951, the Washington Capitals folded, and in the subsequent dispersal draft, the Fort Wayne Pistons picked up a young player called Bill Sharman. Bill Sharman was then traded to the Celtics for Chuck Scher prior to the 1952 season. This is one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history and happened so early. Why do the Celtics always flame the Pistons in trades? Sharman ended up being one of the first guards to ever shoot over 40% from the field. As you can see, between 52 and 53, he upped his field goal percentage from around 39% to 44%, which is huge. He also led the NBA in free throw percentage this season, and he'd do that for a long time. And yeah, so the Celtics just got another all-star kinda just for free. Dolph Schayes had been injured in the last year's all-star game, and this year he'd come back with Larry Faust being one of the first players to miss an all-star game due to injury and come back the year after. He was also third in rebounding, and the Syracuse Nationals were first in the East. He was also fifth in points in the league. Harry the Horse Gallatin on the New York Knicks. The Knicks were still good. He was third in rebounding this season, and of course he's an all-star. Also a new all-star in the East, the top scorer in the NBA, Neil Johnson. Neil Johnson signed a professional baseball contract for the Philadelphia Phillies, and after 2 years in college, he failed to distinguish himself in minor league baseball, and so he tried out for the Philadelphia Warriors in 1951. Now, in 1952, he was number 8 in field goal attempts behind Joe Fulks, who's one of the first NBA superstars and in his last days as an NBA superstar, and Ed Mikan, George's little brother. All he needed was 15 shots per game this season to be the NBA's leader in scoring. The Warriors suck this year, but they're lucky to have a 23-year-old superstar just like that. Bill Gabor is on the Syracuse Nationals. The Nationals are top of the East, so they've got another all-star obviously. If you've been keeping up with this series, the New York Knicks have been to the finals 2 years in a row, and they've done that 2 years in a row without a former number 1 leading scorer, Karl Braun. Now Karl Braun is back from serving in the US military, and he's right back to leading the Knicks in scoring. Paul Seymour is an all-star for the Syracuse Nationals, again, because the Nationals are really good. Paul Seymour is a shooting guard, and he's well known for getting a whole lot of minutes. Don Barksdale, the first ever black NBA all-star. He was only the 5th black player to sign in the NBA in 1951 when he signed with the Baltimore Bullets. This was his only all-star season, as he had 12 to 13 field goal attempts per game. The next season he'd sign with the Celtics, where he'd have a reduced role and slowly injury would take his career away. But on this day, he's the first ever black NBA All-Star. So the 53 All-Star game was one of the worst and also closest games ever. Heading into the fourth quarter, it was pretty close and knotted up when Bob Davies from the Rochester Royals scored 8 straight to give the West a lead, leading into the West winning in an All-Star game for the first time ever. In this game, George Mikan of the Lakers kind of proved that he's the best player in the world in 1953. He had 22, 16, and 2. In the East, we had a couple good games, but nobody else breached 18. As you can see in the graph, nobody else on his team really did anything. The East was really balanced, especially at the top there. But yeah, best player in the world. Mikan led with 22 points, and Macaulay had 18, and Bob Cousy had 15. Mikan led with 16 rebounds. And then Dolph Schayes had 70% from the field. So after 3 All-Star games, Paul Arizin and George Mikan had the lead score with 26 points in a single game. George Mikan now held the second spot with 22 points in a single game. George Mikan also led the first spot in rebounds with 16 in a game, after he had 15 the season before. Bob Cousy still had the record for assists. This was also the first ever time the West won an All-Star game, so obviously this is the best West team so far. And George Mikan is the leader in both points and rebounds after 3 All-Star games, while Bob Cousy is the leader in assists. So 1953 was crazier, but it only gets crazier from here.